Okay, so welcome again, everyone, to our session today. We're very excited to have you. My name is Lauren Lobdell. I am the Vice President of Client Services at Tutor.com and the Princeton Review. I noticed as I see people signing in that there's a lot of our clients on the call today, so we're really, really excited to have all of you, and hopefully that this session will prove helpful to you. For any of you who maybe aren't familiar with Tutor.com and or the Princeton Review, we are offering this because of conversations we've been having with our clients, our friends, our family members who all work in education and are trying to figure out what to do with this need to move online and to do it quickly, to do it overnight. At Tutor.com in particular, we're an online tutoring service, so we spend all day, every day, figuring out how to be engaging and effective and meet students in an online environment. And while tutoring is not the same as teaching, we do have wonderful people on our team who can help in this area because this is what they've spent their careers doing. So it is my great privilege to introduce Dr. Amy Dietzman on our instructional team. She has worked in online curriculum, instructional design, at the K-12 and higher ed level, so she has a lot of background in this area. She's going to really work through today some tips and tools that she has for those of you who are on the front lines, whether you are a teacher trying to figure out how to take your classroom online, or I'm also seeing some of our wonderful Gear Up partners are on this call too, some of those folks that are coordinators for their Gear Up programs out in districts across the country. So we're going to give you some tips and tools that you can sort of use in your own transition here. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it to Amy. Just know that I am here. This is Lauren again in the background. If anybody has questions, I'll man the question box. I am checking email if anybody's having any technical issues, and I will also come back to help moderate the Q&A at the end of the session. So with that, thank you again, and Amy, take it away.
Great, thank you. Hi, I'm Amy Dietzman, and I'll just give you a little background on where I came from in my career. I started off as a high school English teacher, so all of you that are high school teachers, I relate to you the most. So I'll tell you right now that if you are an elementary teacher, I'm going to do my best to try to gear some of the things I'm saying to you as well, but it's definitely not my expertise. So I used to work also in curriculum and instruction and assessment for a large school district, and in that role, I worked on the English language arts curriculum for grades 6-12, and then I did assessment for grades 3-12. So I did do a lot of training and assessment. I worked with my reading specialist partner, and we did a lot of training for K-2 teachers. So I know my brain generally goes to 6-12 type teachers, and I'm thinking about students who are a little bit more independent in this, but I hope that when I'm talking today, what you can do is don't disregard what I'm saying, but try to think about, okay, how can that tool or that idea translate to a younger student, even if I don't touch on it. And then maybe at the end when we talk and we have questions back and forth, we could try to come up with some other ideas for you all. I also went into, after I was a curriculum instruction and assessment specialist for a school district, I went into higher ed and I started doing curriculum and instructional design for Grand Canyon University. At that point, I became a lead adjunct professor also for Arizona State University. I teach education psychology courses for them. And so I've been there for nearly 5 years, and I mostly teach teachers. So that's another area where I'm at. But I also then became the director of professional development for an ed tech company. So I went back into the K-12 realm after being in higher ed for a few years. And I want to make clear to you that I am not a techie. So I am no more technical than any of you, probably less so than many of you. And so when I share these tips and tools with you, I want you to know that it's coming from someone who had to figure it out just like you did, like you will. And I actually had people that worked for me that were very technical, and literally many times before we would do a training at a school, teaching teachers how to integrate technology into their classroom, they were sitting with me, teaching me how to use the technology right before we went into the training. But my expertise really is putting myself in the place of a teacher and trying to think of how you learn, how you can take what I'm teaching and how you can use it with your students. And I also always, as an instructional designer, try to put myself in the place of a learner, of a student. How do students learn? And that's what I'll be talking to you a lot about today. And that's really the goal right now with everything that's going on and moving classes is we want our students to learn something, and it's not the time to try to make it perfect, but we want them to learn something in this process. And so that's what we're trying to do today, is teach you some different tools and tips that you can use. As a result of the training, I really hope that I will help you develop strategies for transitioning your class to an online platform and create some engaging online activities. But I want to stress again, go easy on yourself and give yourself a break here. I know a lot of K-12 teachers are very stressed out and nervous about this transition. It's new for you, it's new for the students, but every lesson doesn't have to be perfect. Try some things, don't be afraid to be honest with your students and say, hey, we're gonna try something new, and if it doesn't work, then we won't do it again next week. And let your students give you feedback. What did they like it? Did they not like it? They know you're new to this, and so you don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be perfect. Last week, I did a webinar similar to this one for higher ed institutions, and I can tell you it was the first time in my career I've done a million trainings. I swear I've done a million trainings, probably not, but I've done a lot, and I have never done a webinar. And so this is my second one. Last week was my first one, and I couldn't sleep for 2 days, and I was so nervous, and I was worried that I wouldn't know how to talk to people without being able to see them, and sitting in my slippers in my office rather than standing in front of a group of teachers in my heels. It just felt really uncomfortable, and I was nervous, and I got through it. And so I just want you to know that we're all into this together. We're all trying new things. This is a new frontier for everybody. With that said, I always like a little sense of humor. I have my favorite person on Facebook who posts regularly the funniest things, and I'm sure you've seen some of these, but he's a teacher, so here's what he says. He's so tempted to text his students while they are in class with their parents. I'm guilty as a parent of texting my student while they're in school. Also, 8 p.m. is now the official time to remove your day pajamas and put on your night pajamas. I've been guilty of that over the last several weeks. And this is how we're all going to look after 18 months of cutting our own hair. So just a little humor for us. And before we get any farther, I just want to take a look quickly at the webinar board, which is a tool that I'm going to teach you a little bit about later if you haven't already used it. It's Padlet, and I just wanted to look and see really quickly who's joining us and where you're coming from. I definitely see a lot of high school teachers. I see a few second grade teachers, so that's good. Okay, special education teachers, a few of you. Okay, good. So that's just going to help me as I talk through the training today to try to gear what I'm saying to you. I will do my best. Okay. Sometimes when we move a course to online, we get a little caught up in all the content and making things engaging, or we want to make sure we give the students enough work to do that we forget how the unit or the lesson was originally designed. So keep reminding yourself when you're doing this and you're trying to build a course, or you're building a lesson, or you're building a week's worth of materials, keep reminding yourself, what is it that you want students to know in the end? What is the purpose of this lesson? What are the students going to get out of this assignment? Will this get the students closer to the objective or the assessment? So then figure out, after you've done that, then figure out how you can get students there in ways that you've never tried before. Remember to start with those backward design strategies and ensure that everything is still aligned and meaningful. So just a reminder, I know you all are well aware of how to build a lesson plan, but sometimes when you put it online, you just start thinking differently. So I want to remind you to go back to what did you originally plan? So what to expect from your students? Keep in mind that as much as you may not have planned to teach your course online when you started this school year off, your students also didn't sign up to take your class online. So some of your kids, some of your students may be thinking, oh, yay, this is going to be so easy. I'm sure a lot of high school students are thinking that right now. And some may be a little anxious. Older students who are self-aware may know that they don't do well when they are self-directed or when they're not given a schedule. And other students think it's great and they've got it all figured out until they don't. And some are just confused. I saw yesterday, I actually sat behind my own son who's 15, sophomore in high school. I watched him do his online course because I wanted to get some information for this. And I was like, show me what your teachers are doing. And he was showing me things, and I'll give you some examples of some cool stuff I saw. But I can tell you that one student had a really hard time figuring out how to turn in an assignment. And she was asking questions, and the teacher, I could see where she was asking questions. It was a kind of a discussion board thing. And the teacher was like, oh, that's fine, do whatever. If you want to take a picture of it, that's fine. The teacher was being really flexible with the student because the student was confused. And of course, my son was like, it's so easy. Why doesn't she get it? You just click here and you go like this. For him, it was easy, but for a lot of students, it isn't, and they get caught up in the littlest things. So be prepared for that and be flexible with your students and accept things in maybe different formats than you normally would. Some students are going to have mom or dad looking over their shoulder, and that can also be frustrating for them. Some students may love it, depends on their age, right? Some students thrive in the online environment and many more do not. So be prepared for students to suddenly have this total freedom, and now they struggle even more with accountability and time management. They get distracted. They have TV and video games and siblings and parents and everybody trying to get on the computer, or maybe they don't have a great Wi-Fi. From my experience, though, the hardest thing for an online learner is that they are undisciplined, and this leads to procrastination. So I can tell you that from my experience in teaching online, I've been teaching for ASU for, like I told you, almost 5 years. And most of the time, my assignments are due on Sunday nights at 11:59 p.m. So throughout the week, I try to grade as much as I can so I don't have too much to do on Monday. So I'll look at the grade book throughout the week, and I'll have 1 or 2 students submit their assignment early. Great. And then Saturday will come around and maybe 3 more students will submit their assignment early, and I'll grade those. And then Sunday night between 11:30 and 12:02, all the rest of the students will submit their assignments. And then Monday morning, inevitably, I'll have a bunch of emails about excuses as to why they didn't do it, or I didn't realize how long it was going to take me. I always have that excuse. I just didn't know how long it was going to take me. And that's very true. And so be prepared that they do procrastinate. And we're going to talk a little bit about some ways to kind of help that. But that is a traditional online student is going to procrastinate, and your students are not traditional by any means, but they will certainly learn what procrastination looks like. Tips for dealing with the distracted and isolated students. Just because you're moving to online, it doesn't mean that you don't interact with your students face-to-face anymore. And that's kind of a myth that online classes are all asynchronous, where you record things and you put things up and your students look at it on their own time. And sometimes that works, and with older students that could work, and that could be great. But I want to encourage you to try some synchronous tools, which I'm going to show you today. Synchronous meaning in real time. Be overly communicative to these students, meaning explain everything way more than you think you should, and email your students way more than you think you should. My advice is keep your emails very short. So it's a quick read. Use bullets, and it's a quick read for your students. Also engage with your students more than once a week, meaning don't have everything like I just said in my online class, which is a typical online class that students sign up to take online. This is not the case for most of you, so I wouldn't have everything due on the same day like I do on Sunday nights. Don't have everything due on the same day, and don't just email your students or meet with them once a week. Check in on them more often and let them see you. Make your expectations clear. Write out more detailed, bulleted, or numbered directions than you ever have before. Consider the fact that these students may have working parents who are unable to help them throughout the day. So a lot of times the students are going to be reading their directions themselves, especially even younger students. They may be reading directions themselves, new readers. So keep directions short for them, but very detailed, lots of steps. And also, so the parents that do jump in and help, they can quickly jump in, navigate. They're not reading paragraphs and paragraphs of information. Depending on the age of your students, group projects are really a must right now because they will help your students not feel so isolated. Another suggestion is check for understanding a lot. Since you don't have the benefit of seeing your students in the classroom and gauging if they're getting it, you're not seeing the shaking of the heads or like the facial expressions when you're in front of your students and oh, I better go back. You're not getting that, so try lots of tools to make sure your students are getting it and making sure your students don't need more information from you. You don't want to see a really great student suffer in this environment. Campus teachers don't always have the same types of grades in their gradebook as online teachers do. Online courses generally have more grades, and that's because there are things like discussions that are graded. As much as we wish our students were intrinsically motivated, and many are, we also have to face the fact that if students don't see a grade or parents don't see a grade attached to something, then they often see that as optional. Consider that as you plan your class. In addition, with parents jumping in and supporting your efforts at home, make sure that you're entering grades in a timely fashion. Don't wait more than a few days to enter grades for an assignment, because it's going to cause a lot of problems for you, parents, and students. Because one, you're going to get a lot of emails. Parents are going to want to know, why aren't the grades in? They're in there now more than they ever were before. And two, you aren't giving parents enough time to intervene if there are problems. Like I said, these students are not online students, so they may not have that discipline, and they may need their parents to help with that. But if you're not entering grades, parents may not know until it's too late. Also, for older students mainly, remember to assess what you intend to assess and what you say you're going to assess. Make sure you don't accidentally have what we call in instructional design as a hidden curriculum. That means that you provide your students with limited directions, and then you use a more detailed rubric to grade them on their assignments. So you said to do these things, and then over here, you're really grading them on these things. Provide detailed directions with everything up front, and then also remind students to look at the rubric. But that way you have two things that match. And in case students don't do that, you aren't getting all the questions later. Well, you didn't tell me to do that. I didn't know. Now's not a gotcha moment. We don't want to get the students and catch them making mistakes at this time. It's just not worth it. Keep in mind that if your class runs for an hour every day, your online class does not necessarily have to equal 5 hours of instructional time. You can use that as a guide, but remember that your online class includes content and activities and a lot of independence. So your students may take longer to do something than they typically did in the classroom. Or your students who thrive and are really great with independence, they may take half as long to complete their assignments. So I'm guessing most likely your institution, your school told you what they want you to do as a rule of thumb, how much content you want to provide. So go with that, but check in often and see what your students are doing. Ask them what's working, how long is it taking, and then that way you can kind of change it from week to week. Like I said, you're just trying this out. You're learning, they're learning, and that's okay. One thing is, like, if you normally stood in front of your students maybe and you talked for 30 minutes and you gave a lecture, some kind of direct instruction, and instead of that now you're giving your students a couple of articles to read and you're providing a video and the video's 5 minutes, that's okay. It doesn't have to be, oh, I think this is going to take them exactly 30 minutes. It's all right if they aren't the same. Hopefully you have access to a learning management system, which we call an LMS. Hopefully you have access to one, but I'm going to go over what it is. A lot of them are free. And then if you don't have access, I'll give you another option. So many are free for up to a certain amount of students, let me say. So if you're a high school teacher and you have 110 students throughout the day, or 200 students, I don't know, just be prepared that it may not be free for you. But if you are a second grade teacher and you have 30 students in your class, most of them are free. The best part about using an LMS is that you can build your classroom and it has all the tools that you really need and all the activities and the content, and you can put it all in one place. There's ways for you to communicate with your students. There's rubrics usually, data on your students' activities, all of that's all in one spot. Not all LMSs are equal, but they are all the best jumping off points for a virtual classroom. So let me just tell you a story. Years ago, when I worked for a school district, we adopted Canvas, and it's because we had an online school, and some of the high school teachers were going to start using Canvas for assignments, a way for students to submit assignments. And so I was not using it at the time for anything that I was doing, but I was part of the training. So I went to the training and I was distracted because it wasn't really relevant to me. And I'm sure you've all been to trainings or professional development where it's not relevant at that time, so you're not really engaged, right? And that's what I did. I didn't really pay that much attention. I had a couple of things going on the next day. I had another training I was doing. So I walked in and out of the room a few times and did other things. And I didn't really learn how to use Canvas in that training. I just basically saw it. So then a few years later, I started working for ASU and they switched to Canvas. And again, I had to go in there and adjust a few things in my course, but we had instructional designers who built the course for us, so there wasn't a lot I had to learn. And then fast forward to last month when I was asked to develop a course for one of our military clients, just a kind of a demo course. And someone said, why don't you use Canvas? And I was like, sure, I know how to use Canvas. I mean, not to the extent that I needed to, but I went in and literally within 2 days had built a course in Canvas, and it was a demo course. I didn't have rubrics and everything in there yet, but I can say I taught myself. And I'm telling you this story because I want you to know that if you haven't had training in how to use an LMS, don't let that stop you from trying. It's really not very complicated. Most of them are pretty intuitive, and you can mess around with it and build your whole course there. So I just wanted you to know. So here's the course I was just talking about that I built. Very simple. It looks, it's very linear, so I really like it because I think it makes really good sense as to where you go. So you start with an element. In an LMS, a module is usually 1 week's worth of content. So for your class, you might have module 1 and then day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, something like that. I have heard recently from my kids' school that some teachers were uploading a whole unit of information into the LMS, and then when parents and students were looking at it, they were freaking out, thinking they had to do all that in one day, or that was 1 week's worth of work. And so be really careful how you organize it. I really recommend you have days and dates and weeks, and it's divided up in that way so that students and parents can look at it and say, okay, here's what I have to do today. Here's a chunk. And it's a little easier for them to digest. All the tools you need are there. So here's this course I built, and basically I have some content. I have peer-to-peer collaboration, which is a very critical thing to do right now, and I'll talk about that later. Peer-to-instructor collaboration. I have an assignment and an activity, and I have a summative assessment. So I'm going to go back. This is a very basic course, but I'm going to show you what it looks like inside. So if you were to click where it says start here, module 1, I just have some readings, which is a mix of articles. I have a video. I always look for TED Talks and YouTube videos for my courses because they're much more engaging than me talking in front of a camera like right now. Some of my classes have lectures, some don't. In Canvas, I also used the generic header just to jazz up the page. That's the little blue bar. Like, I didn't build that. That was there. I just added it in just to make it look more interesting. So that's what that first page looks like. And of course, I have my objectives, and I just built that myself within a few minutes. I do want to say one thing I saw my son's teacher did was she had like a weekly greeting video, and she just was holding the camera herself, and she was standing outside, and she was like, kids, don't forget to go outside this week and make sure that you get some sunshine and get some exercise. Look, it's sunny out, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk off my porch and I'm going to go for a walk. And she did that. And I thought that was pretty good. And I asked my son, was that stupid or did you like it? He goes, well, I kind of liked it. I thought that was like, she made me feel like it reminded me to get outside, and I thought she was kind of funny. And so he liked it, and he's 15. So that's how she started her week, just an idea. Next, there's quizzes. This is it. Again, this is in Canvas, but most LMSs are going to look like this. So here's how you can build a quiz. You can import quizzes from your Word documents if you already have. The system grades it for you, so no more grading quizzes. Canvas has a lot of different quiz questions besides just multiple choice. This is just what I had built for this one thing. The traditional options for peer collaboration is a discussion forum. Obviously, this doesn't work for really young students, but this is available in most LMSs already, so it isn't something you have to create. It's just an option, and you go in and you ask a question and you set up. For all of these things, the main part is to go into the settings and make sure you're setting it up for your students to use properly. So for example, if you are building them this, you may want to make sure that all the students can see all of the other students' posts. There's different ways you can set that up. So just try it. Be very, very clear though in how you want students to interact here. Make sure that the students know your expectations in terms of word count, formatting, citing sources, responding to peers, etc. Again, just be very detailed in your directions. Otherwise, you'll inevitably get the, yeah, I agree, or that texting language where they write in all lowercase i's and they write in one big paragraph. It's also a good idea to have students post their initial response to your question and then have that due like on a Wednesday, and then a few days later have their responses to their peers due. That way, all the students have the benefit of seeing all the other students' posts. And lastly is a summative assessment. In this case, the students were adults and they're writing SMART goals. This brings together all the things the students have learned throughout the week. And I should say that all the stuff that you're doing should all relate back to that beginning page where you had the readings and the videos or whatever content you want to have there. Everything should relate to that because your students are smart. And if they soon see that that doesn't matter and they can do the assignment without it, then they won't do it, right? Or if they can answer all the discussion questions without having to read the article that you assigned to them, then they won't read it. So if that is important to you and you think the students need to read that content or see that content, then you have to tie everything else back to it. Let's see. So that's really mainly what, oh, I also wanted to tell you that you can also add your own rubrics. And so at the bottom, I have a little arrow where I could add a rubric to this particular assignment. Really easy to do. And obviously, if you have older students, it's really important to add a rubric to everything. Another option, if you don't have access to an LMS, you can also build your own web page. Many of you probably already have them. I put on here that Wix or Weebly are the two better ones to use, and I researched again this week to make sure that those were still considered the better ones, and they are. And they're free and easy to use. You just find a template and you add your content, and you can add all your whole course content into a web page too. You don't necessarily have to have an LMS. It's easier because it grades and all that. But if you want, you could add links and things like that to a web page, and then your students could go from there. And if you have low-tech option, your students email you their assignments. So that's another way you could do your class. Just obviously work with what you have to work with. Direct instruction and content. So let's talk a little bit about what you actually put into your class. So I just showed you an example of what Canvas looks like. And like I said, Google Classroom they all look similar. But here, let's talk about what you actually put into your class. So to replace direct instruction that you may be doing the time when you're standing in front of your students and you're teaching them something, be wary of substituting just a textbook. It seems like an obvious substitution, but it isn't always the best way for your students to learn and retain. And remember, the main goal here is we want our students to learn something, especially during this time. We want them to be engaged in learning in some way or another. So if chapter 6, let's say, of your textbook is one of those chapters that you usually don't read in class, you don't usually assign it, there's only one small section of it that's relevant and you test on it, then only have your students read that. Don't assign the whole chapter just because you want to give busy work or you want to make sure that there's content. It's actually more confusing for students and they retain much less if you just direct them to too much. So direct them to what's important. Small snippets from textbooks are okay, and then supplement it with more engaging content like videos. Keep in mind, in an online class, especially with younger students, it needs to be entertaining to some extent, right? And adapted to short attention spans. Think in terms of synchronous or asynchronous content. So let's take a look right now at some asynchronous ideas. So this is what you would do if you wanted to make all the content and upload it into an LMS or your web page and have the students do it on their own time. How can you transition direct instruction to online? These are the simplest ways. You can use a recorded video. Like I told you, you can hold your video up. You can try making a screencast, or you can use a video and screencast. So I'm going to show you some free tools. First of all, obviously, you can use your phone. We all know how to do that. You can use your webcam. That's another way that you can record yourself. You can search Khan Academy and YouTube. And that is one way to not reinvent the wheel. So if you can find content that's already created, that touches on the things you want to teach, it's possibly more high-tech and more engaging than what you could make, don't be afraid to use it. Use what's out there. Screencast videos. If you've never made a screencast video before, it's so easy. And there are lots of tools offered to educators that are for free right now. Some of these aren't always free, but they're free right now. I really like Screencast-O-Matic and Jing. I had no training on either one. I just downloaded them. I watched the quick tutorials, and then I opened up my PowerPoint and I gave it a try. You can use what you already have and just turn it into a video that students can watch in their own time. Just keep in mind that if you have a slideshow that takes 45 minutes to narrate and record, it's probably too long. Remember what I told you, they have short attention spans, so break it up into smaller pieces, only record the very, very necessary things and then supplement it with other things. I also want to point out that we aren't endorsing any of these particular products here, like Tutor.com is not telling you to go and use these. These are just some tools that I've used. This is just my experience. One of the best options is Loom. I like Loom a lot because you can record a lecture and it's actually showing your face and your screen at the same time. So this is adding your personal touch, which your students need at this time, especially if they're young and they're anxious and they have anxiety about what's going on in the world. Seeing you and seeing that you're okay and you're normal and you're still teaching the same way you did before is probably really good for them. So I think this is one of the better options if you're comfortable. It's also super cool. You can flip it to your students and let your students try it as well. This is another one that I just downloaded, and I downloaded the app, by the way. You can download it a few different ways. I used the app, and I played around with it and had a video screencast in like 10 minutes. It wasn't hard at all. So you can also, this is a way you can teach other subjects instead of, you don't have to have a PowerPoint. If you want to have a document and you want to mark it up and talk through it, you can do that. If you want to teach math, all of these things can be done using Loom, so they can see your face and they can see your screen. Now let's look at some synchronous options. So synchronous again means that it's happening in real time. If you have younger students and you need to teach them in a live session, video conferencing is probably your best option. Just remember to chunk your lesson up. You don't want to sit in front of your students and try to teach them something for, an hour. It's probably too long for a little one to sit still, just like in your own classroom. Another option is to try flipping the classroom. So if you have older students, I'm sure you know what flipping the classroom is. It's been around for a long time. And that just means that you assign your readings and your videos and your activities to your students first. Then you have them come to class, and you can use that time when you're video conferencing to have more meaningful discussions, review content that maybe they didn't understand, go over misconceptions or confusing topics. And of course, for larger classrooms, it's probably a better idea to break it up into smaller groups so that students don't get lost. But some of these video conferencing, you can have up to 100 students in there at one time. I just don't recommend it. I think it's better to have a smaller group. I will say I did notice in my son's classroom yesterday that they had an online time for students to come, and it was optional. And I asked him if he would go, and he said, no, I wouldn't go to that. But he said, he thinks some students would. I don't know how it turned out because he didn't go, but I can tell you that, maybe this time isn't optional. Maybe from, 1 to 2, you have one group come through, and then from 2 to 3, you have another group come through, and you make it mandatory. I know my other son's in college, and today he had to go into a video conferencing meeting, and it wasn't optional. So just some thoughts. If your school offers Tutor.com, you can also try Meeting Spaces, which is our video conferencing tool. It's a new product that we provide, and it's free for all of our clients right now. If you're not sure if your school is a Tutor.com client, you can email client services. I put it on the screen there and find out. This is a great video conferencing tool that you can use to interact with your students. You can teach a lesson, have discussions, share your screen, or demonstrate using our whiteboard. And then the screenshot there, you can see that there's, I don't know, I think that's math, not a math person, some kind of a math lesson going on. You can also try group office hours where you set a specific time for students to join, like I was just talking about. Mandatory, not, that's up to you. and tell the story. You can help students, maybe with things they're struggling with, right? Maybe you've assigned a video, and then if anybody didn't understand or wants more help, you can come to this online office hours. I know when I was a teacher, I used to have tutoring after school, and nobody came until, what was it, the last week before grades were due, and then all of a sudden everybody would rush in. Can you help me with this? I'm sure you've had this experience. So you may not have a lot of students come to these. It doesn't mean it's not necessary. Just throwing that out there. Let students provide the lectures. Another option is to let students teach one another. It's okay to step back and let the students teach. And what I mean here is that you provide students with some kind of content, and then you let them submit their presentations or their lectures, and you choose the best ones, and you have everyone else watch them, or some variation of that. I'm sure you can all think of different ways you could do this. When Common Core first came out, we all heard things like, you should be the facilitator in your classroom, make your students do the work. And that's really what this is. If you're working really, really hard, which I'm sure you all are right now, maybe take a step back and say, how can I let my students do some of this? They have a lot of free time right now, so it's okay. At Tutor.com, we always say the one who does the work does the learning. So this may seem a little scary because you consider yourself an expert, and I'm sure you all are experts, but sometimes it's okay to let your students become the expert. And you will probably be surprised at how well they will handle this responsibility and how creative they can be. Discussion and collaboration. So there are other ways to get students engaged, and that's through discussions and collaboration. So just now I was talking about direct instruction, how you take that time when you normally are teaching, but now let's talk about peer-to-peer collaboration, which is really more important now than ever, because most students right now are isolated, are stuck in their houses with just brothers and sisters and parents, and so they need to see each other. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about ways that you can get your students face-to-face, as well as be able to interact with your students yourself. And we already talked a little bit about virtual office hours and face-to-face time and discussion boards. Those all kind of fit into this. So one thing to do is try some connecting with your students and checking in with them regularly through some kind of chat. You can create a group chat in all of these different mediums, and you can even set a time each day where your students can come and chat with you this way. If you find that students are reluctant to do video, maybe this is something that they would prefer. Microsoft Teams is free right now, so I put that on there. It's not normally free, but it's free right now, so there's a good idea. Snapchat, all the kids are using it, so maybe you can get on there and start a group Snapchat. Just some ideas to try to get your kids talking, let your kids see you. Again, just try to create this normal atmosphere. The new normal is maybe to try some of these things. Also, Padlet is one of my favorite tools for collaboration. I imagine many of you have used it before. We used it when we started the webinar today in kind of one of the simplest forms. When I first started using Padlet, the only option was the wall. So now you can set up all kinds of templates, ask questions, and have students add to it. You can do this in real time, or you can make it an assignment. And I see all different ways to use this too with younger students. I mean, having them practice their spelling words and vocab words, and different ways where you can just have students add to the wall and write something. And it can be as simple as a word, and I'll just show you. This is as simple as it can get. When I was doing a leadership professional development a few years ago, I asked the group, what strengths does your personality bring to the workplace? And then they each added something, and then it just led to a discussion. So you can activate prior knowledge by using a Padlet, you can front load some ideas, you can have students demonstrate something that they learned, just different ways to use Padlet. Make sure you look at the settings before you release this, because as you saw today, when you were adding to the Padlet, it's automatically anonymous, and you may not want to do that, but you can have it be where your students have to post their name, and then I know that they use fake names, but hopefully you could set it up where you can get your students to do it properly, perhaps because there's points involved, if they know they're going to get a grade for it. Another example, I use Padlet for a guaranteed and viable curriculum mapping training that I did for a school district. There were teams of people for each grade level, so I put the little cards on there. I put 7th grade, 8th grade, I put those up first, and then they had to make their own list. And then this led to a great discussion. So just a way you can use it kind of as a collaborative group project. Flipgrid is one of my favorite cool tools for discussion and collaboration. You can pose a question and then your students can respond to your question with videos. They can download the app and then you send out a code and you provide a time limit for their video and then they make their responses. I have not tried this with any of my classes, so I asked my sons to do it with me. Like I told you before, one was in college and one is in high school. One is in college, he's still in college, and one is in high school, so they were the perfect target population, so we played with it. And this is kind of what it looks like. Here's what it looks like from the instructor view. So you can see this here. Here's a question I asked them, and then they have to take a selfie when they post their responses, and then I can view their videos, and after I view their videos, I can actually leave written feedback. I can give them a little score based on their ideas and performance. So there's this little grading rubric here, or I can even post a video back to them. So this could work in a lot of different ways for students. I think it's a great way to ask a question, have a student demonstrate something to you. So I don't know, for science or for math, perhaps the student demonstrates, here are the steps that I took to complete this problem, and they demonstrate it, and then you can respond back with a video and say, very good, you did this, this, and this right, but you forgot this step right here. Here's something you would do. And you can respond to them. And so you're getting back and forth with them. As well, they can respond to each other's videos. So another thing where you check the settings when you set this up as to how you want your students to interact. But it's another one of those that you might want to try and then see how it goes and tell your students, we're going to give this a shot. Let's see if you guys can be responsible and if it works. And then we can always try it again next week or not. I will say my son did use this for his Spanish class after I already had talked about it last week. So I was really, like I came up with it first, no. But his Spanish teacher used it. So he made a video of himself speaking in Spanish for his assignment. And I could hear him laughing while he was watching his classmates. His room is right next to me. So I could hear him laughing. And so I went in there and I was like, thumbs up to his teacher because she tried something different. And it seemed, in my opinion, to be fun for him and he liked it. Activities and assessments. So one thing that's come up a lot that I've heard in this online environment is teachers are worried about students cheating. And I just want to point out that probably don't worry so much about that. This is not the time to be worried about students cheating or students, working the system. Really the best thing, like I said, is to worry about trying to get your students to learn. And, when the world is normal again, then maybe we worry about these things again. But for now, I would say kind of give your students the benefit of the doubt and go easy on them. And so start with group projects. As many times as you could do a group project, do it. When you're working in your learning management system, if you have one, a lot of assignments, when you go to build them and you check the settings, you can set them up as group assignments. You can have them peer review. Just try to get your students working together and building a community. Encourage all types of communication between your students too. So if your students are working on a group project, let them figure out how they want to communicate about it, and they will. You don't need to tell them what technology to use. Another thing is use your assessment tools whenever available within your learning management system, and think beyond. If you are a little bit worried about the cheating thing, then think beyond the traditional multiple choice tests. Obviously, if students have to write or give a presentation, then you're less likely to deal with that issue. So lots of times then, turn your old assessment into a presentation. Use one of those tools I just gave you, and your students will probably really enjoy it. Also, embrace technology. Let students be creative and try new things. Putting younger students in a box doesn't allow them to find cool new ways to do things. For example, I recently gave an assignment to one of my classes where students had to submit a narrated presentation. So I was very specific about what needed to be in the presentation, but I did not tell them what technology to use, and I didn't say PowerPoint or anything. And I was amazed at the quality of assignments that I got. I saw all students using all kinds of technology and thinking beyond a narrated presentation, like, oh, I just have to talk and have a slideshow of some sort. They did all kinds of different things. So try that too. Try just changing it up and seeing what your students come up with. So here's a checklist just to get you started, a few things to try. This is just, I'm hoping that none of you were overwhelmed by the ideas I gave today, but can just look at it as try one thing and then try something else. Here's the first checklist. Break up your traditional direct instruction. So obviously the time you just spent in front of the class, you're going to break that up and try to do different things with it. Expand your directions. Make sure your directions are very detailed, but also short and with bullets or numbers. Connect with your students synchronously to help them feel connected to you. Explore a collaborative tool to get your students to talk and work with one another and build a community. And ensure that you are assessing what you mean to assess. And that's all I have for today. So now I will take questions.
Thanks, Amy. And to the audience, I introduced myself earlier, but this is Lauren from Tutor.com and the Princeton Review. I'm going to moderate questions for Amy here. So if you have them, please feel free to type them into the question box now, and we're going to stay on the line for the next little while and just answer questions, as many as we can get to in the time available. There's already a few in here, so I'll turn to those in a second, Amy. One question, just to reiterate, everyone, we are recording this session, and tomorrow you'll get a follow-up email that comes from me that will have the recording, a copy of the slides, though we do have the slides as handout both here in the webinar today and also on the Padlet that we were on earlier in the session. We also intentionally did not spend any time talking about our own particular services today. We know a lot of you are Tutor.com and the Princeton Review clients, but that is not the intention here. If you do have questions about any of those services that we provide to you, we are very happy to answer those. Feel free to just email us at clientsupport@Tutor.com, and one of our team will follow up with those more specific questions. For now, we're really focused on the content of this session and any tips and tricks you're interested in. So we'll start taking some questions. Okay, Amy. So
yes.
Looks like there's a couple questions from elementary level teachers. So I'm going to try to translate this for you. But the question is about how to differentiate for a group of second graders. There's some concerns about lack of being able to see the students, sort of the lack of contact and ability to notice body language, which frankly, for those of you, Amy was mentioning she's not done webinars before. I do them a lot. That's a main thing when you're doing a webinar. We have no idea. There's hundreds of you on this session today, but we have no idea how you're reacting, right? So yeah. Go ahead, Amy, any tips?
Well, I think the best tip is, I can tell you my sister's the principal of an elementary school. And so I called her and asked her, what are you doing with, these K-2 teachers and what are they doing? And she's having them do a lot of synchronous activities. So they're doing a lot of video conferencing. So I would say that's an option where you start the students off and you are face-to-face with your students, start them off in the morning with whatever it is you want them to do, give them some lessons, some kind of direct instruction face to face, and then you have to let them go and do what you've assigned them. So obviously lots of games and Quizlets and all those kinds of things. I know you already use all those things, but it is hard, and you have to let go of some of that control that you have when you're standing in front of your students in the classroom, because it's just not going to be like that. And that's okay. Your students will learn. They will learn something. They won't learn it in the way that you're used to teaching it to them, but they will learn something. So I think that you have to try to limit the time that you have in front of them. And maybe, however your school has it set up, you might check in with them a few times in the day. Maybe you do a little lesson and then you say, okay, now you guys are going to go to this website and you're going to complete this activity, and I'll see you guys again at 11 o'clock, and then you're back in again with them at 11, and you check in and you do a little something, and then you let them go. So that's one option. And like I said, the video conferencing, you can break them up into groups too, so you can see their faces a little bit more and talk to them. But it's hard because they aren't going to sit still really a long time in front of the computer that way either. So it's hit and miss. It's just experimenting, trying new things, being easy on yourself, and knowing that this is going to look different than what you're used to.
One of the questions here is about the idea of the group chatting. You had talked a little bit about that. Could you maybe go back over some of your tips and anything else you would want to say about how to facilitate group chat?
Yeah, I would definitely start, start a group chat using some of the ideas. I can maybe go there. So Skype, Slack, Slack is free right now. I like that a lot better than well, I shouldn't say that out loud, but I like Slack a lot. Google Hangouts is great. So what you do is you just start a group chat, and maybe every morning, not too early because they're probably not getting up as early as they used to, is start the chat and say, hey, here's what we're doing today. Does anybody have any questions? And just go back and forth throughout the day and let them reach out to you whenever they want to. So I recommend any of these are great. Snapchat's great because you can do videos, and you can do videos back and forth with your students. I think your students will use this more than you think they will, because they're so used to, this is what they're used to. They're used to talking to each other and having group chats. So just open it up for conversation. You can also use this as a discussion board. Rather than having students write full-on discussions, you can ask questions and have your students type out texted type answers to those questions. So think of it that way too. If you have a topic for the day and you want to see what they're thinking, or you want to activate their prior knowledge about something, you can start it as a group text and see what they come up with.
Great. Okay. Is Padlet a real-time tool, or are there options to keep it up for a few hours to allow flexibility for students who may not be able to make dedicated time as they are sharing tech devices at home?
Right. That's good. And let me point out that Padlet has crashed on me a few times. Actually, a lot of things have crashed on me a few times over this past couple of weeks as I've been planning these webinars. So be prepared for that. Technology, and everybody's using Padlet. But absolutely, yes, you can leave up the same Padlet for days and students can keep coming back to it. There's no time limit. So you can throw it up and have students do it right then. All right, everybody do this now. And you can literally put it into your assignment, and students get to it when they get to it, and they can still see what other students posted. So, I mean, you can, and to give you an example, you can look at the Padlet that I put up at the beginning of this class and come back in a couple hours and look at it again, and you'll see it's still there and you can still type in it.
Great. One question about PowerPoint. So let me just read this. I can see you've been able to use PowerPoint while you talk about it. Is there a way to do that with a pre-made video where you can stop it, discuss it, then continue? Does that that tool you were recommending, does it do that, the screencast thing?
Yeah, where you can stop it. Yes, I mean, there are certainly ways you could just do a screencast video, or like this one where you can do Loom and you can actually have your face. But absolutely, you can do your PowerPoint. I don't know what you mean by stopping it. What does that say? What did that say, Lauren?
I don't know. It said stop it, I think, and be able to keep talking about. I'm not really sure other than that. So maybe the person can ask a clarifying question. Let me go to the next one.
The answer is yes, you can do that.
To piggyback with the younger students and doing face-to-face instruction, what about the ones that are in daycare during the day? Do you expect those kids to complete assignments during the evening, or is there some can and some cannot?
Ooh, that's a good one. I would definitely see what your school requires. I mean, I would think that there are some requirements as to how many hours students are supposed to be spending in school. So yes, I would say some can and some cannot. I would say that, obviously you're going to have to make accommodations for some students, just like you do in other areas. And like I said, be flexible with students, knowing that they have their own challenges. It's the same way as if a student doesn't have access to a computer until their parents are off the computer during the day, right? Their parents are working, and then at night they can do some activities. And I would say also, don't be afraid to reach out to parents and ask what's working and what's not working, and how you can be there for those students, and how you can help the parents facilitate. I think that's okay too, to open up the lines of communication with parents and find out what they would prefer and what their little kid can handle. I mean, obviously, the students still are required to do some kind of learning at this time. So it just needs to be when. And yes, they would not be able to do synchronous learning. It would have to be more like that example I showed, where you're building a whole class in a learning management system. Start here, read this, then do this, then do this, and you make it very clear, and that student can follow along any time of the day.
Okay. Just to go back to the other question, I think that it's somewhat clarified. I think it's the notion of watching something together, then stopping, discussing it as a group, and then continue watching. And it looks like someone else from the audience recommended checking out Ed Puzzle, which I don't know if you're familiar with. I'm not, but that might work
That's
for
great.
that particular use case. So,
yeah, Ed Puzzle, that sounds great. And you can also, when you're doing like a synchronous, like you're doing something like this, right, where you're using, meeting spaces or Zoom or something like that, same thing, you can share your screen in real time. So you can be sharing your screen and going through some kind of a presentation, stop, and then have a conversation with your students about it, just like you would do in the classroom. You can try that as well.
and there's a lot of questions here about specific technologies. And obviously, Amy has recommended here today ones she's used in her life and her, as a teacher and instructional designer. A lot of you who work in school districts might already have access to a lot of these kinds of tools that your colleagues are using. So we're not, again, endorsing that you use any particular product. If you guys use Google, if you use Zoom, if you use whatever other, XYZ service out there, those are great solutions because your students might already be familiar with them. Your colleagues might already be troubleshooting with them and figuring out what's working, what's not. So definitely, talk to your peers. You're all in this together.
Which is another idea, is when we were talking about chats, start a group chat with all the teachers in your grade level if you don't already have it, or all the teachers who teach the same subject as you. Start a group chat with them and start sharing ideas, what's working, what's not working. Oh, I tried Flipgrid today and I got an obscene video, and then someone else will say, well, here's what I did to fix that, and then you go back and forth and try again. So I think that's another opportunity for collaboration for you too. I mean, you need support just as much as your students need support right now.
I think we're going to have to take just one more question here because we're coming to the end of the session. So this one is about a teacher works at a school where the students may or may not have access to laptops and desktops, and internet is always a question, right? So we run into this at Tutor.com with a lot of the rural schools that we work with, or places where just internet may not be something that people have at home. This can happen actually across the country. So any tips on that for how you might recommend putting together online instruction and assignments?
Well, I think, I would say, what is it that your school district is asking of you, or your school? What are they expecting? I know that my kids' school, they're providing hotspots for all the students who don't have internet access, and there are a lot, but that may not be available, and if it's not, it's not. But I think one of the things to consider is what is it that your school's requiring of you to do with these students, and then secondly, if they don't have internet access, then they don't have access to this content. The only thing you could do is really go back to the old school, where you're literally picking up the phone maybe and calling them and talking to them about, here's what you need to do this week, or maybe you're mailing something. I don't know. I mean, I would hope that they have email and you could email them the content, and you can, if they have, paper textbooks, you can be emailing them, read chapter 1 and then do this, this, and this. That's an option too, is just to go back and forth with email, and then when they do have access, they can gather it that way. I don't have any other suggestions for you for that, because I think that the fact is, this is online school, was what we're talking about, and if they don't have access to online, then we're running into to bigger problems. And I would definitely go to your school and your principal and see what they're recommending. I bet they have guidelines for this. I'm sure they do.
It looks like some people are commenting that some schools, given this situation, are providing hard copies for students that do not have technology. Well, we also find sometimes if they don't have desktop computers and laptops, often students have some form of mobile device. So you just want to be conscious of, a student has to have a mobile education experience, I think. And, it may not be that they're writing you a paper on their phone type of approach.
True. which is why like the video ideas can work for that. And like almost all the apps I showed you, Padlet, Flipgrid, all of those are phone apps too. So those kinds of things students can still do, which is why trying a variety of things and not setting up every single week exactly the same, where, okay, you read this out of this, book, and then you watch this video, and now you do this assignment and you write. If every week is a little bit different, then it gives students who have different technologies opportunities to participate in different ways. So I definitely recommend that. But again, go easy on yourself, knowing that every week trying to come up with different ideas can be a lot. So do the best you can with what you have and with what your colleagues are doing. Get that feedback from your colleagues, and then just start simple and grow from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Amy, for putting this session on for us. I think it was really helpful to some of the people I'm seeing in the comments here. Again, tomorrow you will get a recording of this via an email from me along with the slides. And for those of you who need it, there will be a certificate that will come attached to that email. It'll be out probably about 24 hours from now. And then if you want to share the recording, you're welcome to do so. We're happy to keep taking questions if you want to email us at clientsupport@tutor.com. But once again, thank you, everyone. We appreciate your participation. We hope it was helpful. And if there's any way that our organization, Tutor.com, and the Princeton Review can help you during this time, we are very happy to help in any way that we can. Have a wonderful day and good luck out there. Everybody stay safe and stay healthy.